My sister begged me to replace a bridesmaid at the last second to shame me, but her scheme collapsed when her fiancé walked out on her before 300 guests. My sister Lena and I were never especially close. While growing up, she was the golden child, the beautiful one, and the one who got the bedroom with the bigger window. I was just Mia, the younger sister who happened to exist. When I turned 25, I moved 3 states away for work. And honestly, the distance did more to repair our relationship than anything else. We started texting often and having real conversations. And for the first time in my life, I questioned whether we might actually become true sisters. Can you imagine the gut-wrenching shock when the person you thought was your sister, your best friend, orchestrates a public humiliation so cruel it unravels not just her own wedding, but your entire family? I'm talking about a betrayal so meticulously planned, it left me wondering if I ever truly knew her at all. It all started subtly, years ago. I'd gone on 3 terrible coffee dates with a guy named Ethan in college. We both knew there was nothing there, and we mutually, silently, ghosted each other. Fast forward a few years, and my sister, Lena, calls me, gushing about her new boyfriend. His name? Ethan. I chuckled, told her about our awkward history, trying to make light of it. The line went silent. I quickly reassured her it meant nothing. I barely remembered him. She seemed to accept it, or so I thought. 6 months later, they were engaged, and Lena asked me to be her maid of honor. I was genuinely touched. I poured my heart into it, took time off work, flew home for every event, dropped way too much money on her bachelorette party. I did it all with joy because, finally, I felt like we were becoming the sisters I'd always longed for. Then, a month before the wedding, Lena called, completely distraught. One of her bridesmaids had dropped out, leaving the numbers uneven. She asked if my best friend, Emma, could step in last minute. Emma, being the amazing person she is, said yes. Lena seemed so grateful. She mentioned a champagne and gold color scheme and emailed Emma a link to the exact dress she wanted her to wear. Emma, trusting, ordered it right away. I flew home the week before the wedding, staying with our parents. Lena was off, jumpy, irritable. I just put it down to wedding jitters. I mean, who wouldn't be nervous? The morning of the ceremony, all the bridesmaids gathered at the venue to get ready. I walked in with Emma, and my stomach immediately clenched. Every single bridesmaid was in a deep burgundy dress. Everyone except Emma. She stood there in champagne gold, looking completely out of place, like she'd wandered into the wrong wedding. My heart sank. Then Lena swept in from the wedding suite, a smug, contented look on her face. She practically beamed at someone across the room, my other maid of honor, a college friend who had inexplicably taken over my role just a week prior. My head was spinning. What was happening? Lena started in on me, loud enough for everyone to hear. I knew Rachel would try something, she exclaimed, referring to me by another name. She's been jealous of me and Ethan from the beginning. I was frozen. She then launched into a tirade, accusing me of being infatuated with Ethan for years, of trying to sabotage their relationship, and now, that I'd purposefully put Emma in the wrong dress to cause drama on her wedding day. I just stood there, speechless. Then Emma, bless her heart, calmly pulled out her phone. She showed everyone the text thread with Lena, the link to the champagne dress, and Lena's message. This is perfect. Order it ASAP. The room went absolutely silent. Lena's face contorted. She started screaming, yelling that I must have fabricated the texts, that I was always envious of her, that I wanted her life. Her college roommate tried to calm her, but Lena pushed her away, pointing a finger directly at me, shouting that I'd undoubtedly slept with Ethan and this was all part of my grand plan. That's when Ethan walked in. He'd heard the shouting from the corridor where the guys were getting ready. He looked at Lena, then at me, then back at her, asking what was going on. Lena ran to him, weeping, spewing lies about how I was trying to ruin everything, how she loved him so much. Ethan stayed at her, then at me, then back at her, And then, he said it. His voice was tired, resigned. He told her he'd explained 100 times that nothing ever happened between us, that we had 3 lousy dates 6 years ago, and he was sick and tired of her constantly bringing it up. He revealed how she'd forced him to ban me on social media, how she searched his phone weekly for messages from me, how she'd even accused him of thinking about me during intimate moments. The room was absolutely silent. Lena's sobs intensified, saying she loved him too much. She was so afraid of losing him. Ethan took a step back from her. He looked completely defeated. He told her he couldn't do it anymore. He'd ignored the warning signs for too long, clinging to the hope that she'd settle down after the wedding. He apologized, but he couldn't marry someone who trusted him so little. And then, he just walked out. Lena collapsed onto the floor, wailing, her bridesmaids looking around helplessly, no one knowing what to do. I took Emma's hand, and we left. We drove to a diner and ordered pancakes. There I was, sitting in my burgundy bridesmaid dress at 11 a.m., eating pancakes, on what was supposed to be my sister's wedding day. My phone rang nonstop for hours. My parents, Lena, other relatives, all asking what happened. I just switched it off and ordered more coffee. 4 months later, Mom told me Lena had started therapy. Last week, Lena texted me. She asked to meet for lunch. I need to tell you something crucial about Ethan, she wrote. Something you desired to know from the start. My gut twisted into knots. I read that text a dozen times, the words blurring on my screen. What could she possibly have to tell me now that was relevant? Ethan walked out of that wedding 4 months ago, and I honestly thought that was the end of it. I kept picking up my phone, putting it down, reading it again. The words didn't change. I grabbed my phone and called Emma, hitting dial before I could stop myself. She answered on the second ring, and I just blurted it all out, Lena's message, how my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Emma's response was immediate and firm. Don't go alone, she warned. This could be another setup, another manipulation. We talked for 30 minutes, going in circles. Should I even respond? We finally agreed that if I did go, she'd come with me as backup. I thanked her, hung up, and spent the rest of the evening staring at my phone, trying to imagine what Lena could possibly say. I barely slept that night, waking up every few hours to check for another message. Nothing. The next day at work dragged on, my mind racing, unable to focus. That evening, I texted Emma again. She reiterated, you don't owe Lena anything. You can just ignore it and move on. But something about Lena's phrasing, something you deserved to know from the start, made me believe this was genuinely important. After 4 days of driving myself insane with curiosity, I finally texted Lena back. I told her I'd meet her for lunch at a neutral spot, the Riverside Cafe, halfway between our parents' house and my apartment. And I made it clear, I'm bringing Emma. I pressed send before I could second-guess myself, instantly wanting to hurl my phone across the room. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone vibrated. Lena's response. She accepted my conditions. No argument. No pushback. I stared at the message in complete disbelief. The old Lena, the one from before the wedding fiasco, would have insisted on it being just the two of us so she could control the narrative. Her quick agreement to Emma coming. It scared me in an entirely new way. Had she changed? Or was this a new, more sophisticated type of manipulation I hadn't yet seen? I forwarded the text to Emma. Her reply, 3 question marks. She was clearly as startled as I was. We planned to meet at my apartment an hour before lunch and drive over together. The morning of the lunch, I woke up feeling nauseous. I tried to eat breakfast, but my stomach rebelled after half a slice of toast. Emma arrived right on time, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug. We can still cancel, she whispered. We can get in my car right now and drive to the beach. But I shook my head, grabbed my jacket. I needed to hear what Lena had to say, even if it messed me up all over again. Emma drove. My hands were too shaky. For the entire 30-minute trip, she kept a stream of conversation going, her job, her annoying coworker, anything but the lunch we were heading to. Every few minutes, she'd remind me, "We can leave whenever you want. You're in control." We arrived at the Riverside Cafe 15 minutes early and took a table in the back corner, where I could see the door. I ordered a coffee I knew I wouldn't drink. Emma ordered a tea she wouldn't touch. We waited in tight silence, watching everyone who came through the door. When Lena finally stepped in, right around lunchtime, I barely recognized her. She'd lost at least 18 pounds, maybe more. She looked exhausted. Her face was gaunt, her clothes hung loosely, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. She saw us immediately, walking over hesitantly, as if unsure if we'd get up and leave. She sat in the empty chair across from me without ordering anything. Her hands trembled as she clasped them on the table. She opened her lips twice before speaking, her voice shaking almost as much as her hands. She apologized for everything. The wedding, the accusations, the dress setup, the misery she'd caused me. She told me her therapist, Hannah, had helped her realize she had an intense jealousy issue that had destroyed her relationship with Ethan and damaged our connection. I just sat there, listening, processing the fact that my sister was actually taking responsibility. Lena continued, admitting that Ethan had told her about our 3 college dates on their second date, and she'd been consumed by it ever since. She confessed to making him ban me on social media, constantly checking his phone, accusing him of thinking about me during their most intimate moments. Her voice cracked as she described how her constant distrust and accusations had pushed him away. Then she dropped a bombshell. The dress arrangement wasn't a last-minute panic. She'd planned the sabotage for weeks. She wanted to prove to everyone, especially Ethan, that I was trying to ruin her wedding. She thought if she could make me look bad in front of all those people, Ethan would finally see that I was the real problem, not her jealousy. She truly believed shaming me would fix everything between them. Lena was openly weeping now, tears streaming down her face. I felt Emma grab my hand under the table, squeezing so hard it almost hurt. I took a deep breath and asked the question that had been burning in my mind since her text. Why are you telling me all this now? What's the crucial information about Ethan? Because you haven't told me anything I didn't already know or could have guessed. Lena took a shaky breath, wiping her eyes with a napkin that was already disintegrating. She explained that Ethan had repeatedly tried to invite me to spend time with them as a couple. He wanted to prove there was nothing between us, to show how we could all be normal. But every time he suggested it, she rejected him, accusing him of trying to cheat. She'd scream at him for hours, she said, telling him he was humiliating her by making her watch him flirt with me. Ethan would try to explain his platonic intentions, but she couldn't hear him. She was so consumed by jealousy that any mention of my name sent her into a frenzy. She shifted in her seat, speaking faster now, as if she had to get it all out before losing her nerve. She confessed Ethan had proposed couples therapy 6 months before the wedding. He was worried about her jealousy, hoping a professional could help them, but Lena refused. She blamed him for not understanding her feelings. She convinced herself his idea of therapy meant he was preparing to leave her for me. In her twisted mind, therapy was his way of prepping her for the breakup so he wouldn't feel bad about running off with me. She admits now it made no sense, but at the time, it felt completely genuine and reasonable. Ethan tried to explain therapy would benefit them both, that it wasn't about blame, but she shut down every discussion. The waitress came to refill our water glasses, and Lena paused, then looked directly at me. The important information, she said, her voice barely a whisper, is that Ethan never had any romantic feelings for you. Not even a tiny bit. She claimed her therapist helped her understand she'd created an entire scenario in her brain that had no basis in reality. In fact, Ethan never looked at me specially, never even mentioned me until she brought it up, never gave her any reason to believe he wanted me. She had constructed a narrative where I was secretly in love with him, and he with me, and she was the only one who saw the truth. I sat there, utterly stunned. I expected some big, hidden secret. I thought Ethan had said something, or there was an incident I didn't know about. But this was just her confirming what I already knew, what everyone else at the wedding had known. I told her. I could have told you that myself. I was there for those 3 awkward coffee dates where we discussed economics homework and agreed we had nothing in common. I reminded her that the first time she showed me his photo, I barely remembered him. I had to really think to place him. Lena nodded, accepting it now. But she confessed she'd spent years building this fantasy where I was secretly in love with Ethan, trying to steal him away. She'd even convinced herself that I moved 3 states away just to make Ethan miss me. My job opportunity, my desire for independence, in her mind, it was all irrelevant. Everything I did was part of an elaborate scheme to convince Ethan he preferred me. She'd lie awake at night, picturing scenarios where Ethan would recall our coffee dates and realize I was his soulmate. Her therapist, she said, helped her see she was projecting her own anxieties onto me and Ethan, creating a villain in her story to avoid confronting her own fears of not being good enough. Emma finally spoke, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. Why did you replace me as maid of honor 2 weeks before the wedding? The question hung in the air, and I suddenly remembered that detail, pushed aside by all the other chaos. Lena looked down at the table, her cheeks flushing with shame. She admitted she was worried Grace would side with me as she carried out her dress sabotage. Grace had been her college roommate, knew us both well, and Lena was afraid Grace would speak up, ruining the entire plan. So, she'd fabricated a story about needing someone who understood her vision better and demoted Grace to a regular bridesmaid. Grace was hurt and bewildered, Lena said, but she'd accepted it to avoid pre-wedding drama. Rage started building in my chest, a boiling fury. This wasn't a wedding day panic attack or stress-induced psychosis. Lena had been plotting to humiliate me for weeks, maybe months. She had meticulously planned the dress colors, the timing, the arrangement with Emma. She had switched her maid of honor precisely to ensure no one would defend me when she made her accusations. Every element was deliberate, vicious, designed to make me the villain in her made-up scenario. I thought about all those phone calls leading up to the wedding, where she sounded so appreciative of my help, so happy we were growing closer. All of it had been a lie, a ruse, while she was devising this sophisticated trap. Lena reached across the table to grab my hand, but I recoiled before she could touch me. She started weeping harder, tears flowing faster than she could wipe them away. She said she understood if I never forgave her, that she wouldn't forgive herself. But she needed me to know the truth about how twisted her thinking had become. Her therapist, Hannah, was helping her understand the importance of taking full responsibility, not just apologizing and expecting things to be okay. She knew she'd damaged both our relationship and her connection with Ethan, all because of problems that existed solely in her imagination. Have you had any contact with Ethan since the wedding? I asked, my voice chillingly flat, even to my own ears. Lena shook her head, more tears falling onto the table. Ethan had blocked her number the day he left, and she'd heard through a mutual contact that he'd moved to a different city about a month later. She didn't blame him. She admitted she'd put him through hell, accusing him of things he never did, restricting who he could talk to, monitoring his phone like a detective searching for proof of a crime that never happened. Leaving the wedding, she confessed, was probably the best thing he ever did, even if it had devastated her at the time. Emma spoke up, since I was still too angry to voice myself. Have you apologized to Ethan for what you put him through? Lena wiped her face with her sleeve, nodding slowly. She'd sent him a letter through her therapist about a month ago. Hannah helped her write something that took responsibility without making excuses or asking for anything in return. She mailed it to his new address, but wasn't sure if he ever read it. She hoped he did, because he needed to know that none of it was his fault, that he did nothing wrong. But she didn't expect, or even want, a reply. She just wanted him to know she realized how terribly she'd treated him. I pushed my chair away from the table, standing up, my legs wobbly after sitting through Lena's confession. I told her I needed time to process what she'd said. I wasn't ready to forgive her or rebuild our relationship. The words came out flat and exhausted, held in for an hour as she'd sobbed and detailed her therapeutic breakthroughs. Lena nodded, wiping her face with an already damp tissue. She expected that, she said, but hoped that one day I'd be willing to try. Her voice broke on that last phrase, and a part of me wanted to comfort her, but another part vividly remembered standing in that bridal suite while she accused me of sleeping with Ethan in front of everyone. Emma stepped up beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder, a quiet reminder that we were leaving. As we prepared to depart, Lena mentioned she'd apologized to Grace for the maid of honor switch. She looked at Emma with red, puffy eyes, saying she knew it wouldn't change anything, but she wanted Emma to know she was sorry. Emma accepted the apology, but warned Lena that fixing what she'd done to both of us would take more than just saying sorry. Her tone was courteous but frigid, and I was so grateful she was there. I doubted I could have managed that conversation alone. We walked out of the cafe into the blazing afternoon sunlight, which felt bizarre given how heavy everything inside felt. Emma and I drove home in silence for 30 minutes. Then, I burst into tears. Big, ugly tears that made my whole body shake. Emma pulled over into a gas station parking lot and just sat with me as I cried into my hands. I wasn't sure if it was rage, relief, or sadness for the sister connection I'd thought we were building. Maybe all three, combined into something I couldn't articulate. Emma didn't try to stop me or tell me everything would be fine. She just offered tissues from the glove box and waited for me to breathe properly again. When I finally calmed down enough to speak, I told her I didn't know what to do with all this information. Knowing Lena had planned everything, purposefully set up that dress predicament to embarrass me, it just made it all so much worse. Emma said we didn't need to sort things out right now. We could just go home, watch crappy TV, and eat ice cream. That sounded perfect. I nodded, and she drove back onto the road. That evening, Mom called to ask how lunch went. Lena had already told her we met. I gave her a quick synopsis, sitting on my couch with a pint of chocolate ice cream. Mom listened without interrupting, then let out a deep sigh. She said she and Dad had worried about Lena's mental health for years but hadn't known how to confront it. This stunned me. My parents never talked about Lena's issues growing up. Mom claimed they'd spotted things, but assumed she'd outgrow them. Clearly, that hadn't happened. I asked what they'd seen. There was a long pause. Mom confessed that Lena had similar jealousy issues with her high school boyfriend, accusing his female friends of trying to steal him. She was always calling him, checking where he was, who he was with. They thought she'd outgrown it, but the problems were deeper than they understood. I sat there, clutching my phone, realizing I'd known none of this. Mom said they didn't want to label Lena or make her feel bad, so they just urged the boyfriend to be patient. He eventually broke up with her because the jealousy was too much. I told Mom I wish someone had told Ethan about this pattern before he got engaged. Mom's voice dropped. She said they'd considered it but didn't want to interfere with Lena's relationship. She sounded remorseful now, as if she realized she should have said something. We talked for another 30 minutes before I told her I had to go. After we hung up, I sat in the dark, reflecting on how many people saw the warning signs, yet said nothing. 2 weeks after the lunch, I got a text from Ryan Foster, Ethan's best man from the wedding. I recognized his name from the guest list, remembered seeing him with the groomsmen that chaotic morning. He asked if we could talk, saying Ethan wanted to contact me but wasn't sure if it was okay. My first thought was, this is weird, but then I remembered, Ethan was also a victim in all of this. I texted back, sure, we can talk. Ryan suggested coffee the next day near my apartment. I agreed, curious what Ethan had to say. The next afternoon, I walked into a small coffee shop. Ryan was already seated at a corner table. He was tall, with dark hair, and looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept properly in months. We shook hands, and I sat across from him. Ryan revealed that Ethan felt terrible that I'd been dragged into Lena's accusations, and he wanted to apologize for not defending me more aggressively that day. He said Ethan had been beating himself up over it, replaying the morning over and over. I told Ryan that Ethan didn't owe me an apology. He was dealing with his own personal crisis. Ryan nodded, but insisted Ethan wanted me to know he wished he'd handled things better. He pulled out his phone and showed me a text from Ethan that basically said the same thing. Ryan told me Ethan had been on the verge of calling off the wedding the week before, but his parents had persuaded him to try again. They told him every relationship has issues, and marriage would fix things. Ethan knew it was bad, but he loved Lena and wanted to believe she could change. Ryan said Ethan regretted not trusting his intuition, not leaving sooner. He believed that if he'd ended things quietly before the wedding, I wouldn't have been pulled into the turmoil. I appreciated Ethan thinking of me, but I told Ryan that Lena would have found another reason to blame me for the breakup. Her issues weren't really about me or Ethan, they were about whatever was going on in her own mind. I asked Ryan if Ethan knew about the dress arrangement. Absolutely not, he said. Ethan was stunned when he walked into the room and heard what Lena was saying about me. Ryan claimed Ethan had no idea Lena had purposefully given Emma the wrong dress color. He assumed it was an honest mistake until he saw how pleased Lena looked as she started making accusations. That's when it all clicked for him, and he knew how far gone she was. Ryan leaned back in his chair. Ethan spent the whole morning getting ready, thinking about how to bring up his concerns about the relationship one last time. He never imagined he'd walk in on a planned attack. I believed Ryan. Ethan's face that morning had shown real confusion and horror. Ryan then pulled out a napkin, scribbled down Ethan's new phone number, and slid it across the table. Ethan would like to apologize directly, if you're open to it. I accepted the number, but told Ryan that half of me wanted to talk to Ethan and clear the air, while the other half felt it might be best to leave things in the past. Ryan understood, encouraging me to take my time. We drank our coffee and chatted about other things. Like, life. It was nice to have a casual conversation that didn't involve wedding drama or family issues. Ryan gave me a short hug as we left, saying he hoped I was doing well. I'm working on it, I told him, which felt like the most honest answer I could give. I spent the next month throwing myself into work, taking on extra assignments to keep my mind from spiraling. Emma checked in with me every few days, and one Friday, she showed up at my apartment with 2 packed bags. We're going to the beach for the weekend, she declared. I didn't fight her. I knew she was right. I needed to get away from everything. We drove 3 hours to a little seaside town and stayed in a cheap hotel room that smelled of salt water and damp carpet. Saturday, we walked along the beach, and Emma let me talk about everything that had happened, without interrupting or trying to fix it. I told her how strange it felt that my sister's mental health crisis had become the defining point of my year. I was angry at Lena, yet I felt immense sadness for her too. I wasn't sure if I'd ever trust her again, even if she got better. Emma just listened and nodded, occasionally tossing shells into the waves. Sunday morning, as we sat on the beach eating donuts and watching the sunrise, I noticed my chest didn't feel constricted for the first time in weeks. When we drove home that afternoon, I felt like I might be able to do more than just survive. The next week, I sat at my desk, staring at Ethan's phone number. I'd picked up my phone a dozen times, only to put it back down. What would I even say to him? But then, I remembered how he'd stormed out of the wedding, likely dealing with his own trauma for months. Maybe we both deserved to clear the air. I sent him a text. Hey, it's my name. Would you like to chat sometime? He replied within an hour, sure, and gave me his new number, which he'd changed after everything. We scheduled a call for Thursday evening. I spent the next 3 days terrified of speaking with someone I hardly knew. Thursday arrived, and I nearly cancelled 5 times, but at 7 p.m., I dialed. He answered on the second ring. The first few minutes were so uncomfortable I almost faked bad reception and hung up. But then Ethan said he'd wanted to apologize to me for months, and suddenly, the conversation became easier. He told me he felt awful that I was dragged into Lena's accusations, that he should have defended me more aggressively in that moment, rather than just defending himself. I could hear genuine shame in his voice, which, surprisingly, made me feel less alone in this whole mess. Ethan began to talk about how he'd ignored so many warning signs because Lena was flawless in every other way. He described her as caring, supportive, hilarious. He'd convinced himself her jealousy was just insecurity that would vanish after they married, once she felt more confident in their relationship. He believed that if he demonstrated his allegiance enough times, banning me on social media, letting her check his phone whenever she wanted, she would finally trust him. He now confessed he was wrong to think marriage would solve her problems, and he wished he'd seen the pattern sooner. I listened as he recounted constantly checking in with her when he was out with friends, avoiding female coworkers because it upset her, and the time she accused him of thinking about me during sex. And he actually tried to convince her it wasn't true instead of pointing out how ridiculous the accusation was. He sounded exhausted just describing it all, and I realized he'd been drowning in that relationship long before the wedding. I told Ethan he didn't need to apologize. He was dealing with his own crisis that morning, and I didn't blame him for his reaction. I explained that I was just collateral damage in Lena's problems, but he was the true object of all her jealousy and control. We ended up talking for over an hour. I learned he was a genuinely kind guy who got himself into a horrible situation with someone he cared about. He told me about his regret over leaving Lena weeping on the floor, how his parents were upset he'd humiliated the family, and how half their mutual acquaintances supported her because they couldn't believe lovely Lena would do something so calculated. He'd moved to a new city 2 months after the wedding fiasco because he couldn't bear running into people who knew them as a couple. I felt protective of him, despite us being virtual strangers, because I understood what it was like to be blamed for Lena's issues. Ethan mentioned he'd started therapy shortly after the wedding, working through his own trust issues and learning to recognize dangerous relationship patterns before they became too severe. His therapist helped him see he'd been in a controlling relationship, but hadn't realized it because Lena's control was disguised as love and care. He claimed leaving that wedding was the hardest thing he'd ever done, but also the wisest decision, because staying would have ruined him in the long run. When he talked about it, I heard genuine conviction in his voice, as if he had finally understood that leaving was the correct choice, however painful. He asked how I was doing with everything, and I admitted I was still processing, debating whether to try and salvage my relationship with Lena or just let it go. Ethan didn't offer advice, but he listened, truly listened, and that felt more helpful than any advice could be. We ended the call agreeing to stay in touch as friends, which felt awkward given he was my sister's ex and we'd had 3 bad dates years ago, but it also felt healthy and honest. There's something liberating about talking to someone who knows precisely what Lena's jealousy felt like on the inside. After we hung up, I sat on my couch for a long time, thinking about how strange life is, how the wedding tragedy had introduced me to someone I wouldn't have known otherwise. I saved his new number on my phone under Ethan. No last name, no context, just a person who gets it. 3 months passed. I was having coffee before work when my phone vibrated. A text from Lena. She asked if I'd be willing to meet again. She claimed she'd made significant progress in therapy and wanted to share what she'd learned about herself. I gazed at the message as my coffee cooled, trying to decide how I felt. Half of me wanted to ignore it and continue living my life without her turmoil, but another half was curious about what she had to say. I texted Emma to see what she thought. "Do whatever feels right for you," she replied. "I'll back any option." I thought about it for 4 days, driving myself crazy, before finally responding to Lena. I told her I would meet, but this time, I wanted to do it alone. No Emma. I needed to know if Lena and I could have a meaningful conversation without a buffer. We arranged to meet at the same cafe as before. As I walked in, Lena was already seated at a corner table. She looked healthy, like she'd been sleeping well and eating regularly. Her hair was pulled back, minimal makeup. Nothing like the flawlessly dressed version of the woman I'd grown up with. I sat across from her and ordered tea. For a few minutes, we made awkward small talk about the weather and our jobs. Then Lena took a deep breath. She informed me she'd been diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder with relationship obsessions. Her therapist, Hannah, had helped her see that the obsessive thoughts about me and Ethan weren't reasonable jealousy. They were a symptom of OCD, which caused her brain to fixate on worries of abandonment and betrayal. She was now on medication and practicing coping mechanisms in therapy. It was, she said, like someone had turned down the volume on the incessant, worried cacophony in her thoughts. Lena began to clarify that her jealousy was never directed specifically at me or Ethan. It was about an underlying anxiety of abandonment she'd felt since childhood. She spoke about how we were constantly compared to each other, how she believed she needed to be flawless to be loved, because any flaw meant I would be chosen over her. She claimed she internalized the belief that love was conditional and could be taken away if someone better came along. So, she tried to control everything to prevent this from happening. I sat there, listening, realizing that while I spent our childhood feeling invisible next to her, she spent it feeling like she was one mistake away from losing everything. We grew up in the same house but had completely different experiences of our family, and neither of us truly understood what the other was going through. I took a deep breath and told Lena that I, too, had something to offer. Growing up, I often felt like I was living in her shadow. She looked perplexed, so I explained that I was just the younger sister, not as attractive or successful. I felt invisible next to her. Lena's expression shifted. She said she had no idea I felt that way. She'd always assumed I had it easier because there was less pressure on me. We sat there for a long time, talking about our childhoods in ways we never had before. We both realized we'd wasted years misunderstanding each other's experiences. She told me she felt she had to be flawless or lose our parents' affection. And I told her how I felt like nothing I did was important because she had already done it better. It was the first truly honest conversation we'd ever had about being sisters. As we were about to leave, Lena asked if there was anything she could do to make up for everything, other than just saying sorry. I thought about it for a minute. The most important thing, I told her, is that you continue therapy and work on your mental health. Not just for me, but for yourself. She agreed, adding that Hannah was helping her understand that her problems went beyond just the wedding situation. We walked out to the parking lot and stood by our cars for a few minutes, just talking about everyday topics like work and the weather. Before we drove away, Lena suggested we try progressively mending our connection, like meeting for coffee once a month to practice honestly communicating. I agreed, telling her there was no need to become great friends overnight. We were simply promising to try. She looked relieved, giving me a short hug before driving off. Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in months. Maybe we did have a chance after all. A few days later, I was at my parents' house for Sunday dinner when my Uncle George approached me in the kitchen. He said he was proud of me for being willing to give Lena another chance while maintaining healthy boundaries. George had always been the wise one in our family, the one everyone turned to for advice on relationships and life. He told me what I was doing was what real forgiveness looks like, not about pretending nothing happened, but about choosing to move forward anyway. I told him I was worried Lena would revert to old behaviors, and he said that's exactly why boundaries are important. I can support her progress without allowing her to hurt me again. We rejoined everyone in the dining room, and I noticed my parents watching Lena and me converse, a hopeful expression on their faces. They seemed almost terrified to trust that things might actually get better between us. 6 months passed. I was invited to a small family dinner at my parents' place. When I arrived, Lena was already there, helping Mom set the table. We greeted each other and fell into a casual discussion about a TV show we both enjoyed. It wasn't perfect. There were certainly some awkward moments, but it felt real in a way our relationship never had before. We all sat down to eat, and Dad asked Lena about her new job, which she discussed without the fake enthusiasm she used to have when trying to convince everyone she was fine. Later, while we were cleaning dishes, Mom pulled me into the hallway, expressing her relief to see Lena and me chatting and laughing together. I could see she'd been genuinely worried we'd never speak again after the wedding debacle. Throughout the evening, I found myself genuinely enjoying Lena's company, not pushing or acting, but truly finding her funny and engaging. When I was leaving, Lena walked me to my car. She told me she'd started volunteering with a mental health advocacy organization. She revealed she'd been sharing her experience at the meetings to help others identify compulsive relationship patterns before they destroyed their lives. I was amazed and impressed that she'd turned her worst experience into something meaningful, using what happened to help others. Hannah, she said, had urged her to find a way to give back, and it just felt right. I told her I thought she was incredibly brave, and she grinned, a different kind of smile than before, more genuine. A week later, I was at work when my phone vibrated. A text from Ethan. I hadn't heard from him in months, so I was curious. The message said he'd started seeing someone new, and it was going great, and he wanted to thank me for being a supportive friend during his healing journey. I texted back, genuinely happy for him, asking how he'd been. He called me during my lunch break, and we spent 30 minutes talking about his life and his new partner. He sounded lighter, like he'd finally moved past everything that happened with Lena. I told him about Lena's progress in therapy and her volunteer work. He said he was glad she was getting help, but he wasn't ready to make contact with her yet. I understood perfectly and told him he owed her nothing. Before we hung up, he expressed his hope that Lena and I could build something healthy together, reminding me that sisters are crucial. After the call, I sat in my car, reflecting on how bizarre it was that Ethan and I were now friends, despite barely knowing each other before all of this. The wedding calamity had bonded us in a strange way. Both of us, victims of Lena's infatuation. That evening, as I made dinner in my apartment, I started to reflect on the events of the past year. The wedding tragedy was one of the most terrible events of my life, watching my sister blame me in front of everyone, then witnessing her relationship crumble. But it also taught me invaluable lessons about boundaries, forgiveness, and the distinction between enabling and supporting someone's growth. I realized that ignoring or justifying someone else's actions won't solve their mental health problems. I learned that true love means being honest, even when it's difficult, and that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their actions. Lena and I will never have the perfect sister connection you see in movies, but we're building something genuine and honest. We're learning to communicate without the anger and rivalry that characterized our youth. It's slow and often difficult, but it feels worthwhile. A year after the wedding that never happened, Lena texted me again. She asked if I wanted to go on a weekend trip together. Just the two of us, no parents, no other family. An opportunity to spend real time together. I was terrified, but I agreed. I figured if things got weird, I could always just drive home early. We booked a spa weekend at a resort 3 hours away, driving there on a Friday afternoon. The first few hours were a touch awkward as we settled into our hotel room and learned how to simply be with each other for an extended period. But by dinner that night, we were conversing freely, exchanging anecdotes about work, friends, and strange occurrences in our lives. On Saturday, we had massages and relaxed in the hot tub. Lena opened up about her therapy sessions in ways she hadn't before. She discussed the work she was doing to understand her fear of abandonment and how it had influenced her behavior in relationships. I talked about my own struggles with feeling invisible and how moving away helped me develop my own identity, separate from being Lena's younger sister. We spent hours by the pool, chatting about our future goals and our determination to break the toxic family patterns we grew up with. Lena revealed she was afraid to date again, worried she wouldn't trust herself to identify when she was slipping into compulsive behaviors. I told her that's what therapy is for, to help her acquire those skills. On Sunday morning, before we checked out, we sat on the balcony drinking coffee, watching the sunrise. Lena thanked me for giving her another chance. I told her I was glad I did, but that I could genuinely see she was working hard to change. As I drove home Sunday afternoon, my car filled with spa goodies and my body relaxed from the weekend, I felt genuinely positive about our future as sisters. We'd both matured tremendously over the last year, working hard to understand ourselves and one another. The wedding day was painful, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but it pushed us both to confront realities we'd been avoiding our whole lives. Instead of pretending everything was all right, Lena had to face her mental health difficulties and get proper treatment. To prevent confrontation, I needed to learn how to set boundaries and stop limiting myself. Sometimes the most difficult periods in life lead to the most significant progress. and I'm thankful we both had the fortitude to do the hard work of mending. Our relationship will always carry the scars of what happened, but now they are part of our story. They remind us of how far we've come and what we've learned. I turned up the music and rolled down the windows, feeling the warm air pour through the car. So, here's my question for you. Have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and trying to save a relationship, especially with family? How did you navigate those incredibly tough choices? I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.